my spiritual life started really with my contact with Satya Sai Baba. I was born Catholic. I mean, I was baptized Catholic. I was raised always Catholic. I am Catholic in this very profound sense. But I managed to go very nicely through 30 years of life as a Catholic without a real spiritual life. That's true of many of us. It was actually my encounter with Satya Sai Baba that awoke me to the reality of Christ and of spiritual life and truth, and among other things, that all these stories in the Bible are not just fanciful. Mm-hmm. It was quite shocking to me to realize that most of them, maybe all of them, are literally true.
Whereas many people think of them as being myths.
Well, my own parish priest when I was growing up was a very sophisticated type who would always explain why in the anthropology of the time, historically, it could appear that this miracle had happened, like the multiplication of the fishes. Well, the Jews at that time always carried food on them. It seemed to be time to eat, so they all took the food out, and it looked like now there was a lot more food than there was before. Now, this is my parish priest explaining this. Then, when you actually realize, well, here is someone now who actually does have that power and this sublime beauty and life-changing sweetness about it. You say, oh, this is how Christ worked. This is the reality. I remember the first time I went to the ashram, just dissolving into tears, watching Swami go by and watching a lady reach out to touch the hem of his robe. All these things that you read in the gospel, you're like, of course. But I could never have, from my limitations, reading the Gospels, I could never imagine the beauty, the sublimity, and the truth that's actually right there on the page. I had to go all the way to India and encounter Sai Baba in order to awaken to the reality of my own faith. Me a book to read, which was Sam Sandweiss's The Holy Man and the Psychiatrist. I opened that book. I got to page 3. I remember it was the third page. And I just realized this is true. This is true. It's exactly as St. Augustine says, that no matter what the evidence may be, for or against, there is something in you that says this is the truth.
Your story parallels to a T. Jody's. Yeah. She saw a picture in a man's wallet as he was paying a lunch check. She got that book, and within the first couple of pages, she knew. Many of us can't relate to that. That's just amazing.
For me, it was self-evident. That kind of sublimity, beauty is the hallmark. For me, that was the one guide I always had, was real beauty, of course. Beauty gets tainted with all kinds of things, but real beauty leads you straight to God if you follow real beauty, because God is beauty. And for me, the sublimity of just 2 or 3 gestures that Sandweiss recounts in those first pages, and you realize only the divine can do that.
Wow.
And, then, of course, I cataclysmically had that experience over and over in relation to Satya Sai Baba. So what happened with me then was gradually I started to spend more time in that sort of sacred space around that image and name. Then in 1987, at the same time I started Columbia in graduate school, I started going to the Sai Center in Manhattan. A friend of mine actually set it up. I didn't even have the impulse initially, but he set it up. Then he decided it wasn't for him, but it turned out it was for me because I felt something there, that I felt a kind of sacred, again, stillness and sublimity. And the fundamental hallmarks of truth also in even Baba, this organization, that's grown up in Satya Sai Baba's name, for me were very important. You know, that this idea that Baba has not come to create a religion, to call anybody to follow any creed or sect, but to ignite in them a deeper love and purity to follow their own path, their own religion, to make the Christian a true Christian or the Hindu a true Hindu, because ultimately any path followed with full love and self-sacrifice does lead to God. And that was very important to me. Also, that it would have nothing to do with money. You know, that centers had nothing to do with money. Absolute hallmark.
It's poison.
Yeah, a hallmark of truth.
Funds for any cause.
Yeah, that Baba would not allow money to even be mentioned, and even for seva service projects. If people wanted to do a service project and there wasn't money, they weren't allowed to ask for it. The money would have to be there as part of the collective will to do it. Otherwise, it's not to be done because obviously the will isn't there. These things seem so evidently true to me. They're the marks. Even the very fact that Satya Sai Baba is not trying to gather followers to himself. He has no interest.
Doesn't even want his name brought to him.
Yeah, he says, "Who are you to advertise me? What do you know of my reality?" You know, and that is the truth. I always tell my students too that if they are to encounter a spiritual guide of any sort, you know, in their lives, that the tests are precisely those, that they will never ask for money. They will not even ask for followers. Another one which is very important is that they always do mention self-sacrifice. Any spiritual teacher who does not mention the cost, which is which is crucifixion of the self, the cross, any spiritual teacher does not mention that is not a real spiritual teacher.
And by that, do you think he means the crucifixion of the ego first and foremost?
It's the surrender of the finite self. You have to be willing to let go of what you think you are in order to awaken to the unlimited possibility of what we are in God.
You sound like a veteran. Have you done that?
I've been burning in this fire a while. I've been burning a while.
And does the fire feel good?
The fire at periods is the most intense, exquisite pain that one can experience. That becomes almost indistinguishable from other moments when it's the most intense joy that humans can conceive. But it's beyond that. It's just burn. To burn with leaving no ash, no trace. To become just fire, just fire.
It seems to be a prerequisite.
Well, it's the goal, too. It's what happens. There are no real prerequisites for spiritual life. We're all on it already. I mean, a friend of mine had this image that I liked. He was a big football player. He's a big Swami devotee, too. But I remember his talking to a group of kids once and telling them, you know, life is a game, and it has rules. And guess what? You're already playing the game. And the rules are already operative. They don't start tomorrow.
You may not be aware of it.
And that's true in spiritual life, too. But we say that some people are on a spiritual path. Well, that's just because they become conscious of it and they become very focused on it. But every path is teaching us. And you can't get away from God. You can certainly try to hide your head, ignore it, but God is everywhere. It's kind of hard to flee. Anyway, Swami called us in, and I remember, you know, we went up on the veranda, and he came by. He was going to deal with some other things, and he just stopped and looked at me, and it was quite a look. It was quite a look.
How far was he from you?
That was about 5 feet. And it was almost a withering look. He says, I know everything about you, is basically what that look said. I'll deal with you in a minute. And so then we went inside. I was translating for the group, so they made me sit right next to him, right by his right arm. And he was dealing with all kinds of things in the group, very beautiful things. You know, one of our members, his wife had a serious illness, and his big question was whether she needed an operation. And he had been telling us about this. And the first thing Swami said when he just came into the room, you know, and sat down, he looked at that person and said, no operation. She's in my hands. Right? So before, he didn't ask anything.
You saw this happen.
Oh yeah, I mean, but this, you know, those of us who've been around Swami, you know. Like,
and he spoke only Italian, I'm sure.
He did all kinds of funny things with language in that thing.
No, the person who's walking.
Oh yeah, of course, they only spoke. Yeah, they only spoke Italian. Yeah. I was the only person who spoke English in that group. Yeah. Swami did use some Italian with some of these people too, though. And then there was a young lady who had all kinds of flighty emotional instabilities, but you could see there was something very deep and great about her, but she had all kinds of surface turmoil. And he talked to her under his breath, looking at her. I could barely hear him, and it wasn't Italian, and it wasn't English. I don't know what it was, but it was like he was working on her anyway. Then another beautiful thing. So he turns to another member of our group. We're all dressed exactly the same, right? You know, just the men are all in white. He turns to this one man and says, "What's wrong with the boy?" Well, the person he asked happened to be the doctor in our group. He was a medical doctor. The one doctor in our group. He turns to him and says, "What's wrong with the boy?" Of course, Swami knew that too. So he said, "Multiple sclerosis, Swami." And so I said, yes, I know. Hasn't walked in 7 years, which is exactly right. Giuseppe told us 2 days before, you know, it's been 7 years since I walked last time. You know, all these things. And then he materialized a medallion for Giuseppe and told him to wear it. And then he had 2 people hold him up, and he massaged his right side. And then Giuseppe could stand, actually led him out of the room. That was the first time he had walked in all that time. But he also made it very clear, you know, that was actually at the end of the interview. He led him out of the room, just holding his hand like that, you know, and he actually could walk, you know, he could do it, it was in him. But he said very clearly, Swami said, no wheelchair. He said, practice, practice, practice. He said. It was a really profound, it was very, very clear the way he said it. And I understood, you know, that, you know, the maladies, Giuseppe was wearing them on the outside, we all had them on the inside. And the message was for all of us too. No wheelchair, practice. You know, that you have to find the strength in you to actually start making moves towards God. And God then, of course, runs towards you. But God doesn't do the work. I was just reading today, you know, that Swami said, you know, I can turn sky into earth and earth into sky, but I cannot move the human heart 1 inch closer to God. Because we have to do that. We have to respond. He's right there. If we don't respond, you know, Christ's parable of the wheat, you know, of sowing, you know. So, anyway, at a certain point in that interview, he turned to me. And he was right there, you know, his face was 3 feet from mine. And I'm not going to go into all the things he said. It was interesting, he was using kind of a code between me and him. He would say one thing, all this stuff would flash into my mind, and then he would know exactly, of course. And I would start and I said, no, don't say it. He would know exactly, of course. It was this kind of conversation. But absolutely clear, absolutely no question, you know, about all of the stages in it. But he was very stern initially. It was frightening isn't the word. It's, you know, there's that word that they use in the Bible too, that God is awesome. You know, that's the mark of the divine. It's terror-inducing in a way. How do you explain it? A kind of fear. No, it's something in you knows. There was something in me that knew that this being in front of me had the power to over my very life. With one thought, I would cease to exist. I mean, that radical. My dependence on that reality, whatever it was absolute. It was the first time that I had ever in my life run into a power so much greater than anything I can conceive that I surrendered. I'd never surrendered to anything. It was like a brick wall, running headlong into a brick wall. So anyway, he turns to me with this fire. I mean, there's this kind of fire Shiva in him, you know. And he's very stern. He says, you're here, you're there, you're everywhere, monkey mind. You know, there. I mean, it was awesome, you know. And then he slapped me hard. It wasn't one of those like little tender slaps. It was a real shock to my whole psyche. He slapped me. You know, he said, monkey mind, mad monkey mind, he said to me. And then instantly he completely transformed. He became, and I've never been able to communicate any of this, he became sweeter, deeper, more loving. I've never experienced anything like that. You can say 1,000 times the most intimate love you've ever experienced from your mother, but it's much more than that. A sweetness. He looked into my eyes with a completely unutterable sweetness and just said, love, 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 he said to me. And then he turned and started dealing with other people. I was there sobbing, you know, at his feet. I mean, it was like, and if there are lifetimes, that was any number of lifetimes in one moment. It changed everything. That changed everything in my life, that one moment. And then he started dealing with other people. He was talking to people over here, so he was looking over there. And I was right next to his arm, was on the armrest of his chair. His right arm just lightly placed there. And I was staring at it because I longed to touch it, and I didn't dare. And so then his hand came down and just took my hand. He was just looking over, his hand came down and brought my hand up onto the armrest. And he held my hand and stroked it, and I just buried my face in his sleeve and just cried. And I just cried. And then every once in a while he needed his arm to do something, so he'd take it away and do something, and then he'd bring it back and take my hand again.
Christian, before you go on, do you think maybe some of this is because you're an intuitive, a person whose senses are at a level that maybe others can't relate to? That you had this unmistakable initial contact with him?
I mean, I can say that I said, when I first read some of his words, I recognized something in me awoke, and there was nothing that I can do about that. It's just a fact. It's not a belief. It's nothing I could abjure or give up. It's just a fact. It's part of the reality of what I am. You know, that recognition. It's as deep as my own soul. I had a much deeper experience of that than when I arrived in India and went to the first darshan that evening. I was sort of out of it, actually, at that moment. But Swami appeared. He came out, and just seeing him there was another of these huge shocks. And it was the feeling, the precise feeling there, it was absolutely clear. It was like, oh my, this has been going on a long time. I realized that there was nothing in this life, in this lifetime, in these parameters of this form, that could account for that connection that I felt. I mean, it was going back. I felt as if this was a story that had been going on for 10,000 years, 10,000 lifetimes. I mean, it was just absolutely unmistakable. Unmistakable. I just knew. There was nothing that could account for that power, that connection.
A question, when Baba stands there, or now sits there, and speaks into a microphone that's heard on the ashram grounds by 80 to 120,000 people on any given holy day or holiday, my feeling is his message has to be interpreted at maybe 12 levels, depending on where people come from.
It works on all levels. Yeah, it works on all levels.
And Christ spoke very much intentionally the same way.
Exactly. And one of the extraordinary things, of course, is that with Swami we have actual tape transcriptions. You know, with Bible we have good traditions of conveying, Christ's words and so forth. So we have a strong, but it's highly selected, and even in the Gospels they'll tell us, and I could tell you 1,000 more of these wonders that Christ did, but I'll tell you these, It's all highly selected. We've got, with Swami, we have like an infinite amount of information. I have a friend, a German, who has been studying carefully Satya Sai Baba's discourses from the beginning, even going back and collating with original Telugu. He's learned in Telugu. He's told me he's a great German scholar who teaches here at a university in the U.S. He was telling me, in the future there are going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of scholars whose work is just this incredible. He says it's absolutely breathtaking.
That takes my breath away.
That you have no clue. He said, when you hear these discourses, because a lot of them, on the surface, again, as you say, there's some that sound sort of homely, and again, Christ too, he'll talk about fishes, he'll talk about this. It's like, well, where's the great, where's the Upanishads here? But it works at extraordinary levels, and in fact, he was telling me that he's been tracing in the way the discourses work over years, these patterns of cycles where they actually develop in these cycles and become more and more and more profound, and then start a new cycle, basically. But he said it rises to, because he's also written a huge book on the Upanishads and the Vedas and so forth. He said it's absolutely unparalleled. There's nothing like it, actually, when you start.
Do I gather he's a devotee?
Oh yeah, he's there every year.